A man's youth doesn't end when his skin wrinkles. It ends the day his dreams wrinkle. Youth is not age. It is belief in the future. This idea reshapes the way we understand life, energy, ambition, and identity. Many people grow older in years but remain deeply youthful in spirit because they still see possibilities ahead of them. They wake up with a sense of direction, curiosity, and hunger to explore what tomorrow might offer. Their bodies may change, responsibilities may increase, and circumstances may shift, but their inner fire remains lit. Youth, in this sense, is not a phase of life, but a state of mind, a commitment to growth rather than a surrender to stagnation. It is the refusal to let the past define the next chapter. When a man continues to believe that he has something to build, something to learn, something to strive for, he remains youthful regardless of what his birth certificate says. When a man believes in the future, he carries an internal momentum that naturally keeps him forward-looking. This belief encourages him to take risks, seek opportunities, and evolve rather than settle. You will notice that people who believe their best days are ahead of them walk differently. They talk differently. They move with purpose. They are not trapped by nostalgia or weighed down by regrets. They use their past as a teacher, not a prison. This type of thinking protects the mind from aging prematurely. Instead of telling himself that life has peaked or slowed, a future-focused man continuously rewrites his narrative. He sees setbacks as chapters, not conclusions, and he recognizes that personal growth is a lifelong journey. His youth is preserved because his spirit remains invested in what has not yet happened, not what has already passed. On the other hand, you can observe men who biologically are still young, but feel old because they have lost their relationship with the future. They stop dreaming, stop planning, stop imagining a better version of themselves. Their days become repetitions rather than evolutions. Their inner world becomes smaller, confined, predictable. They wake up without excitement and go to sleep without anticipation. They say things like, "It's too late," "What's the point?" or "I missed my chance." And with each such belief, another piece of their youth erodes. It is not the number of years that drains their vitality. It is the lack of vision. A man without belief in the future becomes emotionally and mentally aged long before his body follows. Belief in the future also shapes how a man responds to challenges. Youthful individuals view challenges as opportunities to sharpen themselves. They are willing to fail, learn, adapt, and attempt again, because they see what failure can lead to rather than what it takes away. They understand that troubles and difficulties are not signs that life is ending, but signs that life is pushing them toward growth. This mindset keeps their spirit flexible, resilient, and dynamic. It prevents bitterness from settling in and allows hope to remain alive even in difficult seasons. When a man can imagine a meaningful future, he endures the present with strength instead of surrender. Comfort accelerates the aging of a man's spirit. It may sound surprising because comfort is often advertised as the ultimate goal: financial comfort, emotional comfort, physical comfort. But what many fail to understand is that comfort, when it becomes a lifestyle rather than a brief moment of rest, begins to quietly drain a man's inner vitality. Comfort removes struggle, and while struggle may seem unpleasant, it is the very force that sharpens ambition, strengthens discipline, and keeps a man mentally alive. When a man becomes too comfortable, he stops stretching himself. He stops testing his capabilities. He stops exploring the edges of his potential. Over time, this lack of challenge shrinks his drive, his creativity, and even his confidence. Without resistance pushing against him, he slowly forgets what he's capable of overcoming. The spirit becomes dull because it is no longer being trained by difficulty, responsibility, and purposeful action. A man's spirit thrives on movement, challenge, and the pursuit of something meaningful. Comfort, however, encourages the exact opposite. It whispers, "Stay still, don't risk it, you're fine where you are." This voice may feel reassuring at first, but it gradually transforms into a barrier that keeps him from evolving. A life built on comfort often results in predictable routines, repetitive days, and a lack of growth. When there is no pressure to adapt or no reason to push harder, the mind becomes stagnant. Even if the man is physically young, his spirit begins to feel old because there is nothing stimulating it, nothing provoking his potential, nothing inviting him to rise above the familiar. He becomes mentally passive, emotionally flat, and creatively weakened, not because he lacks talent or ability, but because he has stopped challenging himself. Comfort also makes a man fearful over time. The more comfortable he becomes, the more terrified he is of losing that comfort. Instead of taking bold steps, he becomes cautious. Instead of exploring new opportunities, he clings to what he already has. His decisions become driven by fear rather than possibility. This fear tightens around the spirit and accelerates inner aging far more than the passage of time ever could. A man who once had courage becomes hesitant. A man who once took risks becomes overly protective. A man who once dreamed boldly begins settling for less. This slow retreat from personal challenge drains enthusiasm from his life, leaving him with a sense of emptiness that comfort alone cannot fill. Moreover, comfort blinds a man to the deeper hunger within him. Human beings are designed to evolve, achieve, create, and strive. When these instincts are suppressed by too much ease, the spirit starts losing its sharpness. A man might feel bored, restless, or disconnected without fully understanding why. What he is experiencing is the decay of potential. Something inside him knows he is meant for more, but comfort has made him forget how to reach for it. This loss of inner fire creates a subtle emotional fatigue that makes a man feel older than he really is. He may look fine on the outside, but internally he is aging faster because he is no longer living with passion, intensity, or purpose. Excuses destroy passion and youthfulness. They act like invisible chains that quietly wrap around a man's potential and tighten every time he avoids responsibility or avoids taking action. An excuse may feel harmless in the moment, something small, something justified, something temporary, but excuses accumulate. They reshape the way a man thinks about himself and his abilities. Each excuse is a micro decision that says, "I am not capable," or "I don't have to try," or "someone else is responsible for my situation." Over time, this mindset becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a personality. A man who constantly excuses his lack of action begins to lose belief in his own power. His confidence shrinks, his enthusiasm fades, and he stops seeing himself as someone who can shape his own future. This internal collapse is what destroys youthfulness long before age ever does. Youth is energetic, forward-moving, willing to fail, willing to try. Excuses suffocate all of that. When excuses dominate a man's thinking, passion becomes the first casualty. Passion requires engagement. It requires effort. It requires showing up consistently, even when it's difficult, even when motivation is low, even when circumstances are inconvenient. Passion grows through discipline, not comfort. But excuses allow a man to walk away from the work required to nurture his passions. A man might say he wants to start a business, but he excuses himself because the timing isn't perfect. He wants to improve his health, but he tells himself he's too busy. He wants to build better relationships, but he convinces himself that people won't understand him. These excuses feel justified in the moment, yet each one pulls him further away from the life he says he wants. Passion fades not because the dream is impossible, but because he keeps avoiding the small daily actions that fuel its fire. Eventually, he stops feeling excited about anything. The spark that once motivated him becomes dim because excuses have smothered the oxygen needed to keep it alive. Excuses also age a man internally by trapping him in a cycle of regret. When he repeatedly chooses avoidance over action, he carries the weight of unfulfilled goals and missed opportunities. This emotional burden creates a heaviness that makes him feel older than his years. He becomes nostalgic for the person he once thought he would be, yet he does nothing to become that person. The conflict between who he is and who he wishes he were deepens, leading to frustration and self-disappointment. These emotions are draining. They create mental and emotional fatigue that ages a man faster than any physical factor. Instead of moving through life with curiosity and energy, he moves with hesitation and guilt. He becomes someone who watches life rather than participates in it. Moreover, excuses destroy youthfulness because they eliminate growth. Growth requires challenge, and challenge requires responsibility. When a man blames circumstances, timing, other people, or even himself in a self-pitying way, he stops learning, he stops evolving. The youthful spirit thrives on improvement, on learning new skills, on adapting to new experiences. But excuses freeze him in place. He might be alive physically, but internally he is no longer expanding. Each day feels repetitive, predictable, uninspired. Without growth, the mind becomes stagnant, and stagnation is the enemy of youth. A growing man is a youthful man. A stagnant man is an aging one. Purpose is the engine that keeps a man young. It fuels his actions, shapes his decisions, and gives meaning to every challenge he faces. When a man wakes up with a mission, something that belongs uniquely to him, his spirit remains energized no matter how old he becomes. Purpose creates forward motion. It pulls a man out of bed on difficult mornings and pushes him through moments of doubt or exhaustion. Without purpose, life becomes a routine, and routine without meaning slowly drains vitality. But with purpose, even the smallest tasks feel connected to something bigger, something worth striving for. This sense of direction keeps the mind sharp, the heart alive, and the soul eager to participate in life rather than merely exist within it. Purpose doesn't just shape what a man does, it shapes who he becomes, and that identity keeps him youthful from the inside out. A man who lives with purpose maintains an inner fire that doesn't dim with age. You will notice that men with strong purpose often carry a certain intensity in their eyes, a quiet strength in their posture, a focus that makes their presence feel alive. Purpose gives him reasons to grow, to adapt, to improve himself continuously, and this constant evolution keeps his spirit young. Without a sense of purpose, a man becomes emotionally and mentally sluggish. He may be breathing, working, and functioning, but internally he feels disconnected, bored, or lost. He drifts instead of drives. Purpose eliminates that drifting. It anchors him to something meaningful and propels him into the future with clarity and confidence. This forward movement is what preserves youthfulness, because youth is not defined by age, but by the willingness to keep moving towards something worthwhile. Purpose also gives a man resilience. When challenges arise, a man without purpose crumbles easily because he has nothing strong enough to hold on to. But a man with purpose is harder to break. His mission gives him perspective. Difficulties become temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations. Pain becomes part of the process rather than a reason to quit. This resilience keeps a man youthful because youth is full of energy, perseverance, and the belief that obstacles can be overcome. A purposeful man carries that belief throughout his life, refusing to surrender to fear, failure, or fatigue. His purpose acts as emotional armor, keeping his spirit intact even when circumstances become overwhelming. In addition, purpose keeps a man connected to growth, and growth is essential to remaining young. A purposeful man is always learning new skills, new ideas, new strategies, new ways of seeing the world. He adapts instead of becoming rigid. He evolves instead of repeating the same patterns. This constant expansion stretches his mind and keeps him intellectually active. When a man stops learning or striving, both his mind and spirit begin to age rapidly. But when he is driven by a mission, he continues expanding long after others have settled into stagnation. His curiosity stays alive, his creativity stays sharp, and his ambition continues to breathe life into everything he does. Furthermore, purpose gives a man an emotional anchor that prevents him from feeling aimless or hollow. Many men experience emotional aging not because of physical decline, but because they feel disconnected from meaning. Purpose fills that void. It gives a man a reason to endure discomfort, to wake up each day with intention, and to build something that outlasts him. This sense of meaning lights a spark that stays vibrant through all stages of life. Without it, life feels empty. But with it, even hardship feels valuable. Responsibility strengthens masculinity and vitality. It forms the backbone of a man's character and gives structure to his sense of identity. When a man accepts responsibility over his actions, emotions, growth, and the direction of his life, he steps into a role that naturally increases his strength. Responsibility demands discipline, self-control, and awareness, and these qualities sharpen a man's inner power. A man who embraces responsibility feels more grounded, more capable, and more connected to his own potential. He grows not because life becomes easier, but because he consciously chooses to carry the weight that builds him. Just like physical muscles grow under pressure and resistance, a man's spiritual and emotional muscles strengthen under the weight of responsibility. This strengthening is what brings vitality, purpose, and a sense of meaning. A man who refuses responsibility, on the other hand, becomes weak. Not because he lacks ability, but because he avoids the very thing designed to build him. Responsibility also deepens a man's masculinity by giving him direction. Masculinity is not about dominance or aggression. It is about accountability, presence, and the willingness to step forward when needed. When a man takes responsibility for his choices, his mistakes, his ambitions, and his relationships, he becomes dependable. He becomes someone others can trust, someone who stands firm even when circumstances are difficult. This reliability radiates strength. It shapes how a man sees himself and how others perceive him. A man who consistently avoids responsibility often feels lost, insecure, and disconnected from his own power. His vitality fades because he is not engaging with the challenges that force him to grow. But a man who leans into responsibility discovers deeper layers of his capability, confidence, and identity. The more he takes ownership of his life, the more masculine and alive he feels. Responsibility also energizes a man by giving him purpose. When he commits to something beyond his own comfort, whether it's work, relationships, self-improvement, or a mission he believes in, he operates with intention. His actions carry weight. His decisions matter. This sense of significance fuels vitality because the human spirit thrives when it feels useful, needed, and capable of making an impact. Responsibility connects a man to contribution, and contribution gives life meaning. A man who has nothing to care for, nothing to improve, nothing to build, eventually feels empty and uninspired. His vitality decays not from aging, but from lack of involvement in meaningful challenges. Taking responsibility reverses that decay by reactivating his inner fire. He begins to wake up with intention rather than boredom, with direction rather than confusion. Moreover, responsibility forces a man to grow emotionally. It requires him to face uncomfortable truths, manage his reactions, and confront the weaknesses he might prefer to ignore. This emotional maturity strengthens him on a deeper level. A man who acknowledges his flaws and works on them becomes more resilient. He doesn't crumble easily because he has learned to handle pressure. He doesn't hide from difficult situations because he has trained himself to respond rather than escape. This emotional toughness is a core part of vitality. It keeps the mind sharp, the heart steady, and the spirit strong. A man who avoids responsibility remains emotionally fragile, stuck in cycles of blame or denial. His avoidance ages him because it keeps him from evolving. Responsibility, however, does the opposite. It expands him, deepens him, and reinforces the very qualities that help him stay youthful, not in appearance, but in power, purpose, and presence. Self-growth and self-care preserve a man's youth. They act as a continuous renewal process that keeps his mind sharp, his emotions balanced, and his spirit alive. Many men assume youth is something they lose with time, but in reality, youth is something they maintain through intentional effort. When a man invests in his growth, mentally, emotionally, physically, he keeps himself evolving. Evolution is what keeps the inner world vibrant. When he commits to learning new skills, expanding his understanding, strengthening his discipline, and facing his weaknesses, instead of running from them, he activates parts of himself that naturally resist stagnation. Stagnation is what ages a man internally. Growth, on the other hand, refreshes him. It gives him new energy, new ideas, new ambitions, and new confidence. A man who is actively developing himself feels alive because every step forward fuels a deeper sense of purpose and capability. Self-care, equally important, protects the vitality that growth creates. Many men neglect self-care because they associate it with weakness or luxury, yet self-care is actually a form of responsibility. It is the foundation that supports everything a man wants to achieve. When he takes care of his health, he gains strength. When he manages his stress, he gains clarity. When he sets boundaries, he gains emotional balance. When he rests properly, he gains consistency. These habits keep his system functioning at its best, allowing him to pursue goals without burning out. Without self-care, even the most ambitious man eventually collapses under the weight of stress, fatigue, and emotional exhaustion. Neglect drains vitality, while care replenishes it. A man who cares for his physical, mental, and emotional well-being is not indulging himself. He is preserving his capacity to fight, build, and thrive. Self-growth also prevents the emotional stiffening that often comes with age. Many men age prematurely, not because their bodies weaken, but because their minds become rigid. They stop being open to new perspectives. They stop challenging their own beliefs. They stop thinking creatively or stepping outside their comfort zones. This rigidity makes life feel smaller and heavier. But a man who continues to grow mentally stays flexible. He welcomes new ideas. He adapts. He stays curious. Curiosity is a youthful trait. It keeps the mind active and prevents the dullness that comes from repetitive, unchanging routines. When a man is still learning, still improving, still shaping himself, he does not feel old because his spirit is expanding rather than shrinking. His growth keeps his identity dynamic and alive. Emotional self-care plays an equally powerful role in preserving youth. Many men accumulate emotional wounds, disappointments, and unspoken stress that quietly drain their vitality over the years. Without proper care, these emotional burdens weigh them down, making them feel tired, withdrawn, or detached. But when a man learns to process his emotions, communicate honestly, release resentment, forgive himself, and seek peace within, he frees himself from that invisible weight. This emotional clarity brings lightness, a return of enthusiasm, openness, and presence that resembles youth more than any physical feature ever could. Taking care of one's inner world keeps a man vibrant because he no longer carries the heaviness that ages the soul. A man becomes old only when he accepts he is old. Aging begins in the mind long before it shows in the body. The moment a man convinces himself that his best years are behind him, something within him shuts down. His ambition weakens, his enthusiasm dims, and his curiosity fades. He starts moving through life as a spectator instead of a participant. This acceptance of oldness is not about wrinkles or grey hair. It is about surrendering the desire to grow, to strive, to explore. A man can be in his 20s and feel old if he carries defeat in his mind, just as a man in his 60s can feel young if he still believes there is something worth living, building, or fighting for. The internal decision a man makes about his identity, whether he is still becoming or merely existing, is what determines the true age of his spirit. When a man accepts that he is old, he unconsciously limits himself. He stops imagining new possibilities because he believes time has run out. He stops taking risks because he assumes growth is no longer meant for him. The dreams he once held close begin to fade into distant memories instead of future goals. Instead of saying, "I will," he begins saying, "I would have." And these small shifts in language reflect a deeper shift in identity. This mindset subtly drains energy from every aspect of his life. The man who once felt capable, bold, and willing becomes hesitant, cautious, and self-restricting. This psychological shrinking accelerates emotional aging far more than any biological process ever could. The belief that his journey is over becomes a prophecy that fulfills itself. On the other hand, a man who refuses to accept that he is old maintains a powerful connection to life. He keeps his inner world in motion. He may slow down physically, but mentally and emotionally he stays sharp, engaged, and awakened. He continues dreaming, planning, striving, learning, and challenging himself. This refusal to label himself as done protects him from stagnation. It keeps him connected to his purpose, and purpose is the force that keeps a man alive from within. Such a man sees every year as an opportunity to deepen his wisdom and expand his impact rather than a countdown to irrelevance. He is fueled by the belief that he still has something to offer, something to build, something to become. This belief keeps his spirit young, even as life progresses. A man becomes old when he stops seeking adventure, whether that adventure is in ideas, in growth, in relationships, or in his own personal development. When he stops imagining a better version of himself, he begins to age internally. This internal aging shows up in the way he speaks, the way he walks, the way he carries his energy. He no longer approaches life with the confidence of "I can," but with the resignation of "it's too late." Yet the truth is that nothing ages a man faster than the belief that time has passed him by. His body may still be capable, his mind still sharp, his potential still alive, but his acceptance of oldness prevents him from using any of these gifts. He becomes a prisoner of a belief rather than a victim of age.